This is a historical biblical account of the dream of a great secular king.
In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep went from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, and the enchanters, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. The king said to them, "I've had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream."
Daniel is methodical and gives a clear dating pointer for this dream as being in the second year of King Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Since these ancient writings usually have a year or so discrepancy, virtually all conservative scholars place this dating between 604 and 603 BC. The famous Jewish historian Flavius Josephus recorded that the dream occurred during this time in his reference books, The Antiquities of the Jews, during the 1st century. What is worth pointing out is that Daniel was likely in his final year, close to completing his training, when this major event happened. Now you might be thinking all this fuss over a dream, but then again, this was no ordinary dream. We know that the king was laying down dozing off to sleep, thinking of the magnificence of his kingdom when the dream struck him for the first time. Since he later refers to dreams in the plural, it is apparent it was driving him crazy, as it appears he was having the same dream over and over, with the same result. He was becoming anxious, neurotic, and fearful, just like the many other Babylonians who treated dreams very seriously, especially since they believed it carried answers. He was thinking about the future, and now was highly concerned about it. His reaction is fairly typical, and although layered with neurosis, it would certainly not be comfortable to be in his presence. There are a few groups of wise men who were part of his advisory council, whom he immediately summons in order to get answers. In Daniel's writings, they are referred to as the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans. You will notice that the king has an order of preference. The word magicians may seem very impressive, but since it is written using the Hebrew root word pen, it likely refers to men who were just considered wise. Enchanters are a bit different and are part of the dark sciences. Many of them believed in necromancy, which is talking to the dead, while others in their camp predicted the future by studying astrological patterns. Sound familiar? Third in line were the sorcerers, who delved into the occult practicing witchcraft. Since they mixed various poisonous brews together, they were well feared by others in the community. Last on the list was the infamous Chaldeans, which were the same men in charge of the king's training program, where Daniel was completing his forced enrollment. They were part of the old guard.
Then spoke the Chaldeans to the king in the Aramaic language. "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation." The king answered the Chaldeans, "The thing is gone from me. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a rubbish heap. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation."
You will notice that the Chaldeans, who spoke Akkadian, spoke to the king in Aramaic. Aramaic was the diplomatic language of that time, which was widespread across Mesopotamia. The switch from Daniel's writing from Hebrew to Aramaic until the conclusion of chapter 7 also provides us with a clue of how the chapters unfold. Everything Daniel describes to chapter 7 is a prophetic term assigned as the time of the Gentiles, a lengthy time period of Gentile influence and rule over the Jewish race. The Chaldeans attempted to appease the king by granting him flattery, but it is also noticeable that the king distrusted them. Naturally, they wanted the king to relay the dream so they could interpret it. Unfortunately, they had a history of telling lies, so the king would have none of it. The Babylonians were extremely superstitious, and the king had apparently reasoned that if they had received a message from the divine, they would also know the dream, not just what it means. The king's response to them with the words, "It is gone from me," has three possibilities at first glance. Either the king had forgotten aspects of the dream, or he was deliberately being forgetful to force its interpretation. Forgetting it is unlikely, as he later confirms the dream. The third possibility is that the phrase, "it is gone from me," can also be translated as, "it has been firmly decided," indicating his words as a proclamation. What good is pressure without some extra motivation? King Nebuchadnezzar set forth two options. Option 1, if the council cannot relay the dream and its meaning, would result in them losing their limbs and being torn apart. The Babylonians, the Persians, and the Assyrians were all notorious for carrying out these decrees. It certainly was not an idle threat. But if they get it right, he would not only know that they had received divine revelation, but would also reward them with power, gifts, rewards, and honor throughout his kingdom.
They answered the king the second time and said, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation." The king answered, "I know of a certainty that you would gain time, because you see the thing is gone from me. But if you do not make known to me the dream, there is but one law for you. For you have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me, until such time that things might change. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation."
Well, that was a tug of war. The advisors insisted that the king tell them the dream. The king accused them of biding for time in a hope that he forget about the matter, showing his complete distrust for them. In the king's mind, they were buying time in order for them to come up with a bunch of lies. Clearly, the king had no faith in them or their abilities and questioned their usefulness.
Strike 3. The Chaldeans answered before the king and said, "There is not a man on the earth who can show the king's matter, because no king, lord, or ruler has asked such a thing of any magician or an enchanter or Chaldean. It is a rare thing that the king requires, and there is no other who can show it before the king, except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh."
Interestingly, their admission that no one on earth can do this and the gods don't walk amongst us supported the king's view in them claiming divine knowledge when they actually had none. They surely did not serve a God that walks amongst his own. Their admission went against their own claims as being wise and having supernatural abilities. This was all exposed by King Nebuchadnezzar.
For this cause the king was angry and very furious and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went forth, and the wise men were to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to be killed. Then Daniel returned an answer with counsel and prudence to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who was gone forth to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree so urgent from the king?" Then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would appoint a time, and he would show the king the interpretation.
Implied from these scriptures is that all wise men in Babylon would be publicly executed. Arioch, the captain of the guard, executed all orders, and there was clearly a time period to identify and gather all the wise men. Daniel clearly knew nothing about this, but as he was enrolled in the training program, the entire school was up for execution. He used proper etiquette to inquire as to the urgency of the matter, and when informed of the reasons, he immediately requested a time to be scheduled where he could provide King Nebuchadnezzar with the answers he required. Daniel's response was clearly convincing enough for Arioch to book an appointment with the king. Since Arioch allowed him time to inquire, he was clearly dragging his feet and suggests that he was not in favor of the decree. As the next sequence of scriptures relate to the storyline, we are going to give you a chance to read and absorb the storyline and key events. Feel free to pause if not enough time is given. It is interesting how Daniel approached the Lord in prayer. You will notice that he gathered fellow believers around him. They ignored opinions, own counsel, and brought the matter collectively before the Lord. When he received the answer, he sang out from his soul, acknowledging God as the source of all wisdom. It serves as a reminder, God alone sets times and seasons, time frames of kingdoms, and appoints according to his will. The Lord also reveals the deep things and gives knowledge, wisdom, and understanding to all those who seek him diligently. Don't ever forget this when you are in a pickle. Daniel credits God first in all his writings. If the prayers of a righteous man are powerful and effective, how much more is the prayers of righteous men gathered together before God in unity? As the next sequence of scriptures relate to the storyline, we are going to give you a chance to read and absorb the storyline and key events. Notice how Daniel speaks with authority with the words, "Do not bring me, and I will show you," to Arioch. His confidence is soaring. Also observe how Arioch attempts to take full credit for God's work with his choice of words, "I have found a man." This is part of a theme in the Bible where God extends mercy to the wicked for the sake of the righteous. Thirdly, since the king had doubts that this 20-year-old boy had the solutions, it does suggest that he was using the dream, which he knew was important, to eliminate all the wise men he inherited from his father. He clearly had no faith in them. Daniel appears to calm the king by mentioning that the account will only be fulfilled in the latter days. The phrase "the latter days" talks about the closing days just before God physically establishes his kingdom on the earth. This is why we pray, "Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Just as Daniel by God's power was a catalyst in spreading mercy to the wise men of Babylon, the coming of Jesus extends mercy to the whole world for those he calls.
You, O king, saw, and behold, a great image. This image was mighty, and whose brightness was extraordinary, stood before you, and its appearance was awesome. As for this image, its head was of fine gold, its breasts and its arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet part of iron and part of clay. You saw until a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on his feet that were of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold broken in pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that no place was found for them. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth.
Daniel explained that the events in the dream concerned matters of the future and occurred while the king was considering the future of his empire. It was not revealed to him to obtain power, status, or glory from men, but for the king to be able to understand the matters of his heart. It is evident that the thoughts of King Nebuchadnezzar were centered around the majesty and greatness of his kingdom. After all, he successfully transformed, consolidated, and expanded his empire to the greatest empire of that time. Since God does nothing without declaring it first to his prophets, God revealing the dream was in accordance with his eternal plan for mankind.
The dream's main character. The center of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream was a great image which appeared before him. It was not an idol, but a statue which had human characteristics. Daniel described the 5 traits of the statue that stood out. Firstly, the head of fine gold flowed into the breast and arms of silver, then a belly and thigh of bronze, followed by legs of iron, and finally the 5th element was described as feet of part iron and clay. The next thing Daniel recalls from the dream is a stone cut out without human hands, striking the statue on the 2 feet and shattering the statue into oblivion. The stone transforms into a mountain that covers the whole earth. For each of these 5 traits, there are contrasting elements. Firstly, one notices the decrease in splendor and brightness, represented by the head of gold to silver to bronze to iron, and finally a mixture of iron and clay, represented by the feet of the image. Another contrasting feature is that each of these elements decreased in weight. After all, gold is heavier than silver, silver heavier than bronze, bronze heavier than iron, and iron naturally heavier than clay. The third contrasting feature is that although all the elements are progressively lighter, the materials get substantially harder. The 5th and final trait of the statue is unique, having a mixture of iron and clay, indicates that the statue was top heavy, as iron and clay do not mix well together. Let us not forget about the end result. The stone is cut from supernatural origins, as it was cut without human hands, and it strikes the statue on its feet and completely obliterates it, turning the statue into fine dust which the wind carries away. The same stone grows into a huge mountain which covers the entire earth. The statue or image is gone forever after being struck. There are important word pictures or metaphorical undertones, as this dream is apocalyptic in nature and it would be foolish to ignore. The level of violence striking the base of this image's feet is emphasized, likening it to summer threshing floors. Threshing floors were smooth, hard surfaces where wheat would be spread in the sheaves, and in ancient times animals would crush the sheaves, leaving the edible part intact. The inedible substance was cast into the air using winnowing forks, where the wind would dispose of the chaff, leaving the good grain behind. This was known to symbolically represent divine judgment upon the wicked. And this we see in the Psalms, Isaiah, Hosea, and Jeremiah. There is another word picture which emphasizes the meaning. The stone itself is described as growing into a great mountain and filling the entire earth. While a mountain in scripture in most instances refers to an actual mountain, it is symbolically used in prophecy to refer to a dominant kingdom. The prophet Isaiah likened a noise on the mountain to the uproar amongst kingdoms, forecasting Israel's pending destruction. Similarly, Babylon is prophesied as becoming a desolate wasteland for eternity, described as a destroying mountain. That was quite a bit to absorb. See you next time where we continue to decipher Daniel's interpretation of the king's dream. Until next time, Maranatha.